Hello, everyone. I'm joined today by Michael Collins, and today is a truly extraordinary discussion because Michael has done a literature review on professionalization, and he has used system thinking to analyze the professionalization grant put out by the Australian government. And he's published a study that has been submitted to an academic journal. And so what we're going to do today is Michael is going to share his key findings with us. And he's also going to explain to us step by step the methodology that he has followed so that we can appreciate what an evidence-based study looks like and how it raises the bar compared to other types of arguments that have been put forward so far in the discussion. So without further ado, Michael, in a few words, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Benjamin. So I have a cybersecurity advisory called Cyber Cognition, which I started around about a year ago after a long career as a CISO in financial services, and also have been a independent researcher in the field of systems thinking. Have published a number of papers and articles around how we can apply systems thinking to cyber security, and that path has sort of led me to where we are today with the research we're going to talk about around professionalization.
Thank you, Michael. Could you share with us what your motivations were for doing this research that, as I understand it, took you about 6 weeks of work?
Yeah, it was really started from a place of disengagement, I guess, and looking online, predominantly around LinkedIn, and seeing that there was this online discussion around the grant that the Australian government had for professionalisation of cybersecurity. When I looked at it, I thought, well, it may be a good thing, it might not. It would all depend on what evidence there is to support that professionalisation would be a good thing for the industry. And then it was really seeing the very robust discussions that were happening online, some of them quite emotional, that really drove me to thought, well, if I'm going to look at this and have a position on it, maybe what we need to do is, go and see what the evidence is that would support whether this is good or whether it's going to impact the industry. And being someone who's been in the industry for a long time, you have a vested interest in understanding what this might actually mean, both for yourself and for the people that follow you in cybersecurity. So for me, it just piqued an interest to take a research based approach and an evidence-based approach to understanding more about it. And it really turned into a rabbit hole that, like you said, Benjamin, I went down for at least 6 to 8 weeks doing a very detailed analysis on it and applying the systems thinking methodologies that I use to understand what the outcomes of this proposal might be.
Michael, can you share with us the 3 key points that you would like the audience to take away from today's conversation before we dive into the details?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is that it's a complex challenge that we're looking at, and complex challenges or problems aren't well solved by a single solution. They typically require a number of solutions to be in play. The first thing you need to do is make sure that you understand what is the complexity of the system that you're dealing with. So I think hopefully as we talk through this today, people will see that it's not just simply do we implement it or do we not. It's understanding all of the impacts that it may have on the cybersecurity workforce system as a whole. The second thing would be like myself, if you're interested in really trying to understand and remove the emotion from it, it's about looking at the evidence that's there to support your position, making sure that you're taking the time to, get your own perspective based on the evidence rather than taking an emotional view to it or having an ideology about, what you think the problem is and how it should be solved. Which kind of leads into the third point, which is, this is your industry as a cybersecurity professional. So you should be engaged and active in having robust discussions and asking the hard questions, both of people that are proposing what the solution is and those that are, opposing the solutions. You need to make sure that you come to your own conclusion as to what it might mean. And that means rather than just passively watching it happen online, as being actively involved and engaged and understanding so that you can understand how it will impact potentially your livelihood going forward.
Thank you, Michael. Let's go into the methodology that you followed for this study. Can you explain what a literature review is and what system thinking is, and explain why it's evidence-based?
Yeah. So systems thinking is a very broad term, but basically what it means is looking at not only the system as a whole, but the parts of the system that play a role in that system, how they're interconnected, the relationships between those parts, and understanding different perspectives around the challenge that you're looking at. So the particular theory of systems thinking that I applied here is called DSRP theory. So that simply means D is for distinction, so understanding what's in scope, what's out of scope. S is about the systems. So what are the parts of the system that you should look at, and what do those parts form as a whole? R is about the relationships, so understanding the connections and the interactions between the parts of the system. So you have an appreciation for if you change something in one part of the system, how does it impact another part of the system? And then P is about perspective. So not just taking your own perspective, because often we have a bias when we're looking at any sort of solution or problem or challenge to just see it through our own lens. And we don't take into consideration other people's perspectives or even conceptual perspectives, which I can talk about later on as well. So DSRP is the systems thinking way of looking at the system and documenting it. The second part of it was what they call a ABA, an agent-based analysis. So often when you're looking at systems which are complex and dynamic, you need to understand the agents, so who's playing a role in the system, what their behaviours are, what rules do they follow, because that will determine the dynamics of the system and how actors act and respond and behave in the system. And then the literature review that you talked about is what I conducted was a rapid literature review utilising some of the AI research tools to be able to quickly understand what research exists today across millions of research papers, what research exists today, what the research questions are that you want to ask, and then you get this distilled or synthesized view of the research literature that allows you to understand what have other people done, what have they discovered, and then it's about taking that evidence base from the research and the literature review that other researchers have done across multiple industries, layering that over the system once you've mapped it out and understood who all the actors are in the system, and then again layering the ABA analysis over to say, if you were to do this, how would it affect the system, and what's the potential ways that the actors in the system would behave, and what are the emergent outcomes of that system and the influences that you're trying to put on it. So it's a really comprehensive way of first understanding what's the system that you're working with rather than jumping straight to a solution, which is illustrated in the title of the paper, which is about understanding first and solution second. Understanding all those different perspectives and relationships, and then what does the evidence in previous research tell you about how this system may behave if you're trying to implement similar solutions.
Thank you, Michael. Can you share your screen and show us what you understand the government wants to do with professionalization? Show us just the start of the system where you have analyzed the grant documents and recovered the goals of the government.
Okay. So, as you said, Benjamin, the first place to look when I started the research was to look at the grant document, because that is sort of the baseline of what the government's trying to achieve, and using that to help inform who are the players in the system and what are they trying to do. So basically here you've got the Australian government, which has the Department of Home Affairs, who, as we mostly, everybody knows, released their 2030 cybersecurity strategy. As part of that, outcome number one was had an initiative to grow and professionalise the cybersecurity industry through a grant of about $1.9 million for the successful entity to implement this scheme over a period of 2 years. So the main problems that they were trying to solve based on the grant document was addressing a gap that they believed they had in the industry of a professionalisation scheme and a way to standardise cybersecurity professionals. The other key goal they want to do was reduce barriers to entry into the industry to get more people into the cybersecurity industry, and to make it and to fill the supply gap that they believe they had in the market today. There were some other comments around improving service quality that were listed out there as well, but there's not a lot of details behind that and what's driving that, what they believe the quality issues are. But it was also about creating clearer pathways for people to move into the industry and give them, a clear roadmap of how they would progress through cybersecurity from junior roles up into senior roles. The government stakeholders are obviously Department of Home Affairs. They're one of the ones that make the decision on who gets the grant. Department of Industry, Science and Resources also have a role to play in that as well. And then as part of the selection panel, there's a number of other government departments that would select the successful grantee. So you've got the Australian Public Service, Department of Employment, Work Relations, the two departments I mentioned earlier, and then a broad statement around other relevant departments. So that's kind of the key areas of who's involved in the government grant and the key areas that they're trying to address.
And Michael, do you have a diagram that shows a before and after, so to speak? This is the current system or the current status quo and where the government is hoping to move towards with professionalization.
Yeah, so probably just before that too, I'll just jump to the second view that talks about the licensing body or the grantee. So the successful grantee would be responsible for developing and delivering that scheme. There's a number of other key stakeholders that they need to work with as well. So the expectation is that it would be an industry-led co-design team that would help develop this scheme. And also there's other relevant stakeholders in here as well that need to be considered as part of it that were named, which includes the Future Skills Organisation. There's a body called the Executive Cyber Council, responsible for workforce as well. And then there's a number of other accreditation bodies and then there's government at both a federal, state and local perspective as well. So when you look at the overall system that we're talking about here, the first thing that I did was went out and map those actors, if you like, or the parts of the system that are involved in cybersecurity workforce. And this is where the sort of level of complexity starts to become apparent. So you've got cybersecurity industry organisations that are involved in this system. The ones that they noted in the grant document were the Australian Computer Society, AustCyber, and ASA as well, the Australian Information Security Association. So they form a part of a system as the industry bodies. You've then got international best practice skills frameworks, which were called out as well. A number of them here. There's SOPHIA, which is the skills framework for the information age. You've got NIST's framework around workforce education. You've then got the CyBOK, or the cybersecurity body of knowledge, and then they also noted the Chartered Institute of Information Security. So they're just a number of sort of high-level frameworks that are considered as part of this. You've then got the educational institutions, which play a role in the system as well in terms of generating a pipeline of cybersecurity professionals. The parts of that system, you've got universities, technical colleges, private training providers, and then organisations that provide continuing education requirements as well. Then you've got your professional certification schemes. This is organisations like ASACA, which have the certifications around CISM, Certified Information Security Manager, and other certifications. And then you've got ISC Squared, which is probably most well known for the CISSP certification. So they're operating in this system as well. Then you've got the cybersecurity workforce, which is what this is primarily hoping to solve, typically made up of two types of professionals, the certified and non-certified. You've then got new entrants into the market, which typically come from job seekers who are looking to get into cybersecurity. They may come from parallel industries, or they could come from totally different industries. You know, you see people coming in from travel, real estate, even hairdressing. And then you've got the minority groups that are part of those new entrants as well that are trying to enter the market and potentially facing barriers to entry there. Then you've obviously got the threat landscape, which impacts how the cybersecurity industry matures and evolves as well. That's one of the main purposes for the workforce being in place. And then you've got the business and employers, which are typically made up of government, large enterprise, small, medium enterprise, not-for-profits, and then you've got the cybersecurity providers, or the managed service providers, or the solution providers as well. So a lot of parts in the system that are operating dynamically. They've all got their own, objectives that they're trying to achieve. And then once you map out who all the actors are, so to speak, in the system, it's then looking at the relationships between all of those parties and how they interact. So without going through all of these relationships, you can see them here in green where there's different parts of the system are connected. What I've done there is just highlight that relationship and how you distinguish those relationships between the different parties. So at a very high level, you've got new people trying to enter and increase the workforce. You've got the existing workforce, which is providing skills to business and employers. And then you've got the certification schemes, which are about validating people's skills, getting certifications. The education institution, which is creating a pathway to try and address those workforce shortages. And then you've got the cybersecurity industry organisations, which influence hiring practices. And then you've got the proposed scheme, which is the professionalisation scheme, and how it relates and interconnects into all these different actors and what they're hoping to achieve through that with those connections and relationships that they have. So very, very complicated or complex system. And you can see from this web that trying to change something in one part of the system can have knock-on effects in other parts of the system as well. And if you just approach it, as I said earlier, from a point solution, you potentially create these unintended consequences throughout the rest of the system that you're not planning on if you're only looking in a very myopic or a focused way at one part of the system and what you're hoping to achieve.
Thank you, Michael. That's great. Do you have this before and after view that we could show?
So I think if you're looking at the before and after view, it's really about not so much a view, but probably about a where are you trying to move from as the current state and where are you trying to move to as the future state. So looking at the current system that we have today, what we have is a system that prioritizes certifications over experience, and you see that in the way that jobs are advertised today and the focus that cybersecurity professionals have on achieving certifications. So there's a very strong behavior towards people focusing on certifications, which is driven also by employers just asking for certifications as a demonstration of your capability and your experience. And so that becomes a reinforcing loop that we find that cybersecurity professionals almost have this very obsessive focus on getting certifications because that's what employers are asking for. And so you end up with these behaviors where that reinforces also for new people that are trying to get into the market that they must have certifications as opposed to experience to get into the market. And that's why you see this huge uptick in people trying to get certifications, all these programs to bring people on through certifications rather than focusing on experience. What that actually does, though, is creates this paradox between people needing certifications to get into the environment, into the workforce, but then needing experience as well. And they can't get in to get experience because they don't have a certification. Yet once they get the certification, people want experience. And so they get stuck in this loop where they can't get a job, but they've paid for money to get a certification. So that's one of the things that creates that barrier for people to get in, is there's no way to get in and get experience first unless you have a certification. But then what they find is they have a certification and no experience, so they still don't get the jobs. So what you actually end up with, we can jump over the perspectives analysis. What you actually end up with when you look at the current structure of the system is you have, as I mentioned, a focus on certification, skills, yet not experience as one of the drivers for hiring. We've got a system that has many diverse entry pathways for people to try and get in. You have this very fragmented certification landscape. So you end up with all of these organizations offering certifications, and it's quite confusing for people that are trying to enter the market. So they try and get as many certifications as they can. There's a lack of standardization across those different certification bodies and what people are expecting to have at different levels. In the market, there's a premium that's paid for people with certifications. And as I said earlier, you end up with these hiring practices that just privilege people that have the certifications, which drives that that loop to continue focusing on certifications without giving them the opportunity to get experience. And that's that skills experience paradox that I talked about, as well as what's noted here is the experience opportunity loop. So people can't get experience, so they don't get an opportunity to get experience, and therefore they can't get into the workplace. So it becomes very difficult for them to get entry into it. And so that structure of the system, you end up with a behavior where you've got inconsistent skills across the workforce. You've got certification-driven career advancement. That creates barriers to entry for new people. You end up with what you see is opportunistic job hopping. So people jumping from company to company to get a pay increase because they're driven by their salary. And you see risk-adverse hiring practices where employers will only employ people if they have a certification, which is not the only consideration that you should have. And so what this potentially creates is what's called artificial scarcity in the market. So it's not that there's a lack of people that are available to work in the cybersecurity industry. It's just that we're looking for the wrong things. We're looking for people that have experience and have certifications, which is a very small group of professionals in the wider industry. And we're not being a little bit more innovative and looking for people that have the right behaviors to work in cybersecurity, but don't have the certification or experience in creating opportunities for them to come in. And there's plenty of those people out there waiting to get entry into the market. The market's just preventing them from getting into the market, which creates this artificial scarcity. So if we look at the current, what we do then is look at what they call a POSIWID analysis. So this just says what's the purpose of the system. So not what is it designed to do, but what is it actually doing? Because often the system will do things that we didn't originally intend it to do. And so the current POSIWID of the cybersecurity workforce is that it's very well designed and good at maintaining that artificial scarcity that I talked about, which really benefits established professionals, but perpetuates the barriers for people to get into the workforce, despite there being an apparent chronic workforce shortage. Once you understand all of that, then you look at, well, what's the future state of the system? How do you want the behavior of the system to work in the future? And so you look at the future POSIWID or the purpose of it. And it should
Michael,
be that.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just want our audience to hear that everybody that I speak with, including those who oppose professionalization, more or less agree to all the challenges you have outlined in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And as we will soon see in this discussion, what we're going to show is that professionalization is probably the wrong tool for solving these challenges. But it is not that we dismiss the merit and the existence of those challenges. I just wanted to make that very clear. So, Michael, back over to you. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point, and we'll touch on that as we get towards the next few steps. You're exactly right. Is it the right tool for the challenge that we've got at the moment? Is one of the fundamental questions. So, as I said, the future state is we want to have a system where it's well designed with clear pathways for qualified professionals that have verified skills. The system should have lower barriers to entry for people that want to get into it. It should remain adaptable to the changing needs of that threat landscape as well. And you want to get to the point where you've got equilibrium in the workforce. So you've got an adequate supply for the gaps that you have, rather than either a huge deficit or a huge oversupply. So trying to maintain that equilibrium between professionals that are existing and want to get into the market is very important to make sure that you are able to provide that supply to the industry and the employers. And the way to illustrate that is the core differences between what we've got today and where we want to get to. they're outlined here in these 5 core differences is we should be focusing on being centered around capability and not certifications. We should be getting to the point where, as I mentioned, we've got a supply-demand balance rather than this artificial scarcity, that there's clear pathways for people that are coming into the industry versus the fragmented certification frameworks that we've got. We should be focusing on developing experience rather than privileging only those that have experience in the market and giving them opportunities. And we should have clearer entry requirements for people to get into the market with a clear roadmap of how they progress, rather than these barriers that we have, which are making it hard for people that are either in minorities or new to the industry, making it easier for them to get in so we can get that supply-demand balance more aligned. I might just pause there for a minute and see if you've got any questions on that one.
This is great, Michael. Would now be a good time to start talking about the literature review and what the findings were? And maybe you could share your screen and show your paper so people can get a visual of how you did this, and then walk us through the key findings. And I'm particularly interested in the section where you explain the economic impact, the workforce impact, the service quality impact, and the barriers of entry.
Yeah. Let me just share this one. All right, can you see?
Yes.
The diagram?
Can you zoom in a little bit for the audience in case people are trying to watch? In any case, they'll be able to download the paper from directly from the essay that I'll publish alongside this.
Yeah. So basically, let me just go back to the literature review. It's quite a lengthy paper. So what I did was ask 2 questions as part of the review to make sure we got papers back that were relevant. So the first research question was, what's the impact on occupational licensing on the economic performance, quality of service, workforce growth and retention, and consumer protection across different industries? And a similar question for professionalisation. Now, there's an interesting point here that the reason I asked 2 questions around what's the impact of those 2, what they sound like different approaches, is there's a subtle difference between occupational licensing, which these schemes are sometimes known as, if they're run through the government and by the government, they tend to be called occupational licensing. If it's not regulated by the government, it tends to be called industry professionalisation. Now, basically, they're the same approach, but they're just managed through 2 different mechanisms. They're either, self-managed by the industry, or they're managed through the government. So basically, the search looked across, 126 million academic papers. It pulled out the top 50 that it identified as being most relevant to those queries. And then I went through a screening process that looked at how relevant those were to the questions that were being asked. That then filters it down and gives you the most poignant or relevant papers that are related to the questions that you're asking. And so I broke that up into 2 areas to cover both occupational licensing and professionalisation.
Michael,
yep.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could we focus today on the findings for professionalisation, just so that we stay on this one topic for this discussion?
Yeah. And to be honest, the differences aren't that great anyway. So basically what you've got here is a table of all the papers that it pulled back based on how they designed their study, what industry they focused on, the outcomes that they measured, the scope of them, which really just gives you an idea for how varied the different approaches were across different industries and locations. If you're talking about the effects of professionalisation, so one of the impact measures was what's the effect on practitioner earnings. What they discovered was there can be anywhere up to a 30% increase in a practitioner's earnings when they're working within a professionalisation scheme. That typically happens when, because you shrink the available number of practitioners in the workforce, creates a higher demand for that certification or that accreditation, which means it drives up the earnings potential for those practitioners as well. So it's a supply and demand position where if you create less supply, demand goes up, and you can typically raise the prices, so people potentially can earn more money under a professionalisation scheme. But the other thing that does too is then drive up costs for employers. So if you're charging more, employers have to pay for more, and in a market like Australia where you have almost predominantly small and medium-sized enterprises, you're potentially pushing access to resources out of reach of the majority of the economy here in Australia as well. In the case of employment, there was a slight positive to a negative sort of impact on employment for people in the industry as well. Service prices again tended to rise. That was pretty consistent across the studies. And as I mentioned, that market competition dynamic was that when you shrink the available resources, make them harder to get, it reduces competition of other competing firms in the market as well. So firms that focus on making sure that their resources are part of the professionalisation scheme and have that accreditation can potentially have a market or a competitive advantage against firms that aren't part of that accreditation scheme as well. So you tend to find firms that align to that dominate the market, which again, in terms of the consumer supply, reduces that as well. So I guess if we just sort of then focus on those economic effects and the sort of key findings out of it, prices consistently increase, competition decreases, you end up with fewer firms and less regulated services, versus when it's unregulated by an accreditation or a professionalisation scheme, you typically have better efficiency because you have faster time to value and productivity growth because there's more players in the market. We mentioned earnings increase, but generally the employment effects are negative with those fewer firms and reduced services. The impact on quality is mixed. So in some areas, service quality increased, and they're typically high risk areas where there's people's lives at risk. There's benefits to having professionalisation schemes in those areas. And barriers to entry, it really makes it harder for people who are struggling to get into the market to be able to now have to meet these new requirements of accreditation on top of having certification and building that experience. It makes it difficult for them to enter the market as well.
Thank you, Michael. I want to come back to your system analysis, because once you've combined the literature review and the system analysis, you are able to design measures of success to be able to objectively measure whether the grant has succeeded or not, including the pilots. So could you share your screen again and walk us through those measures of success, please?
So I think anybody in cybersecurity, or technology would appreciate that if you've got a solution that you're implementing, you want to have some way of knowing whether it's successful or not. And this is no different either. Probably just before we go to the success measures, when you look at how you then influence this system to get to that future state that you want, what you should do is have a set of design principles that you measure what your recommendations are for when you do an implementation. And these are design principles which are agnostic to the solution, that when coupled with the measurements, give you a really strong framework to ensure the success of the program, no matter what it is. And so the design principles that I've listed out here, irregardless of the recommendations that I've sort of put forward here on the right, anyone should be able to provide different recommendations, providing they follow these same design principles and meet them, then it should be considered a valid solution as well. So the design principles that you want to try and adhere to here is, the first one is you want to make sure that you address the skills shortage rather than make it worse and exacerbate it. Second one is you want to make sure, because of the requirement for this to be sustainable, that there's sustainable funding mechanisms that don't increase entry costs for people coming into the market. Third is that you should integrate with rather than replace existing certifications. There's obviously a time and place for certifications. What you don't want to do is create something else that people need to have to get on top of what they're already having to accumulate today. The two main stakeholders in the system are the employers and the professionals. So we want to make sure that we can demonstrate this value to both of them. It needs to be flexible to recognise the diverse entry points coming into this system, and there's diverse groups of people that have different experience levels that need to enter. You want to balance standardisation with flexibility. If you're too rigid in terms of how you regulate the industry, that can have very adverse effects on it as well. And I think there's a really good local case study here in the financial planning area as well. So if you remember back to the Royal Commission they had into banking and financial services a couple of years ago, one of the areas they identified was that there was potentially sort of cowboy financial advisors out there that were ruining the system. And no doubt there probably was some people out there that weren't acting ethically and taking advantage of consumers. So what they did as part of the reform was they created very high barriers for people to be able to be accredited as a financial planner. One of the things in the research that the Chartered Accountants Organisation did was that they discovered that the number of financial planners went from something like 3,000 people in the market down to 500 because they'd raised the bar so high it became very difficult for people to achieve the accreditation required to operate in the space. What that did was, the negative impacts on consumers was it created a very small pool of people that could provide financial advice. And so a lot of people were excluded in lower incomes brackets from being able to access financial advice. So it was actually a perverse outcome because they tightened it up and made it too rigid. So you've got to maintain that flexibility, which talks to point 7, is that you want to make sure you're not creating these perverse incentives that lead to counterproductive outcomes. And I think one of the ones that's definitely not clear in the grant program is, if it is a pilot, we're assuming it's not going to be permanent. Therefore, we should have clear exit criteria that if the scheme doesn't meet its objectives, that we should just pull the pin. Many of the people, will be familiar with the sunk cost fallacy, which is you spend all this time and money putting something into into life, and you create this child and you want to see it live, but if it's not doing what it's supposed to do, then you need to have a real clear line on when you say this is not achieving what we want to. Otherwise, these things can just limp along for years and you end up with some of these potential poor outcomes. So maintaining those design principles becomes key for whoever implements whatever solution they might have. So your point about then measures of success. So there's many more of these that are listed out in the research paper. I just picked some key ones out that I think would demonstrate whether this program is achieving what we want it to do. One of those should be the industry participation rate. So what's the percentage of employers that are recognising and requiring this scheme's credentials? And that should be something that grows over time by demonstrating that there's value and that employers see value in it as well. So they're promoting it. The other thing is professional enrolment. So we want to make sure that there's people that are professionals voluntarily registering with this scheme, rather than being forced to join it as part of some other membership. If the professionals see value in it, then they should be voluntarily joining the scheme. You could segment that by career stage as well, so you can see where is it getting the greatest uptake and the greatest growth. We should have some way of measuring barriers to entry into the market. So you would think that if this is something that is in demand in the market, that the time to hire and the ability to bring new entrants into the market compared to the baseline is showing that it's got benefit. If it is to address the minority groups, then we should understand the number of underrepresented groups at the various levels that are measured against industry baselines, to making sure it's not creating further barriers for people to get in, and that they are actually entering the market. Metrics towards the financial self-sustainability of it should be key, but making sure that it's not increasing barriers as well. So we don't want something that's financially sustainable but is actually increasing barriers, because then it's working against itself. And then those stakeholders we mentioned earlier, which we can go back and touch on, that perspectives analysis. We should be understanding that all of those key perspectives are seeing satisfaction in this scheme, and that it's actually delivering to their needs and desires rather than just to one group's needs and desires. So getting a more holistic view. So they're just some of the things I think that would be able to demonstrate, whoever the successful person is, transparently to the market, that this scheme is actually delivering on what it said it was going to do.
Thank you, Michael. Let's go to your conclusion now. If you could unshare your screen so that next time you talk, the camera switches to you. You've analyzed the entire system. You've looked at the literature. You understand the measures of success. You've created design criteria. What is your conclusion on the grant that the government has put out?
Yeah, look, I think when you look at all of the evidence that you mentioned, and part of doing this paper as well is that people can take this away, and with the methodology, they should be able to reproduce a similar outcome rather than just this is Michael's, biased perspective on it. So, I welcome anyone once this gets published to go and do it. If you want to do a formal peer review on it, that's great. That's the whole point of the sort of scientific methodology. But really, for me, I think the scheme shows, and this analysis hopefully shows, that there's a fundamental tension between the challenges that we have in the workforce today, trying to make it more open, yet implementing a scheme which, by its very design, is about limiting access to a certain group of people that meet those requirements. And even the Professional Standards Council says on their website that it's about creating this regulated entity, which limits people's access and controls who gets to play in this space or not. So while I think there's some admirable goals that people have in trying to address the workforce shortages, make clearer pathways for people, and reduce the barriers to entry based on the evidence from both licensing and professionalisation, it really indicates that those two objectives are contradictory, that by restricting the available resources in the market, it just drives up prices, makes it harder for people to enter, creates more barriers. If it's implemented in the way that all the other industries have tried to implement it. So again, back to your earlier point, it's not saying that there isn't a place for professionalisation. It's just that in its current form, it doesn't appear to me that it's going to be successful in meeting its objectives. So there would have to be some radical innovation that people apply to this scheme to implement it, and that it's done openly and transparently so that people can see if it's not working, then we need to pull the pin and say, it was a great attempt. We gave it our best shot, but it's not doing what we need it to do. So for me, in its current form, I can't see how, based on the evidence, that it's going to increase the workforce, that it's going to lower barriers to entry, and other than for a small group of people, benefit the industry holistically across all those different perspectives.
Michael, when I read your paper and I reached the conclusion, what really struck me was, and this is just my opinion, but I want to see if you agree with this. My opinion is that whomever wins this grant, if we actually take the grant document and we take your measures of success that have emerged from this document, whoever wins this grant is set up for failure. That was my opinion. What do you make of that?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the original documents not clear on what the ultimate goal is. They've got a lot of competing objectives with conflicting priorities, that just makes it a little bit of a hodgepodge of, hey, this would be great for these 8 to 10 problems we've said that we don't have a lot of data behind, but they seem to be issues the industry's told us that, you're having. So yes, I think it makes it very, very complicated to be able to succeed against all those criteria, because they literally are just a bucket of what seem like gripes that people have with the industry. And it may be valid and may not be, but with the lack of data, they seem to be more emotional responses to things they don't like about the way that the industry operates today. But yes, if you were to apply those measures, it would be very difficult, based on the evidence of where this has been done elsewhere, to expect that it's going to succeed. And that may be they've unconsciously set it up that way. I'm sure that there's not some sort of political conspiracy to do that. You would hope not. But yeah, I think they've just made it too broad. Too focused on professionalisation. Even the name of the grant, growing the industry and professionalisation. We know professionalisation reduces the size of the workforce. So those two things at a title of the document level just don't seem to gel. So I think it's almost like they haven't really thought it through, which is about, again, the title of the paper is understand the system first before you come with a solution.
Thank you, Michael. For me, your research just confirms what I had myself found when I went into the academic papers and I look at legal scholars in the United States that did some research on professionalization. But what you've done is really magnificent, because you've applied it to the local context. And you mentioned political conspiracies. I just want to say out loud that I've been looking into this matter for 6 months now. I've not confirmed any conspiracies. However, it does look that whoever had an input into these documents had not looked at the evidence. That much, I think, is very clear to me. And I want to leave the audience with one last thing, and is you've created a huge opportunity here, Michael, I think, because you have set out the design criteria that would allow anybody to try and think of solutions. And you have clarified that we don't need a single solution. There could be several options that are being tried at the same time or one after the other. We could break down the problem into smaller problems. And so I think that your work, beyond just having been very rigorous on the research, you are actually offering a way forward. What do you make of that, Michael?
Yeah, well, I certainly, appreciate your comments, but it almost goes back to things that we inherently know in our industry, which is, defining the problem first is the key part of any solution. And it's so easy to get caught up in, in cybersecurity, having your favorite tool set that you want to implement because you think it's going to solve, one problem. And so you go and put that tool set in, and then you find out that it stops all your users from working. Or it creates knock-on effects, unintended consequences that you now have to deal with because you didn't think it through. So for me, yes, it's been helpful for me to understand this whole system and the dynamics in play and what they're trying to achieve. But ultimately, if there's anything, it's the principle that people should take away from this, that it's not just on professionalization. This can be applied, anywhere across any industry, but it really makes you think a bit more, quote unquote, systemically, which is the whole point of systems thinking. But yeah, so I think it's, people taking the approach rather than just the outcome of this one application of it is probably, what I'd hope people to take away.
Michael, thank you so much. Let me give you one more praise. I wish I had written this paper that you have written. I think it's great. I really admire the methodology that you have used. And I know that you're working on a course to teach cybersecurity professionals how to work in this way. And I'm so impressed by this document and this research that I haven't done the course, but I will be attending it for sure. And whomever feels impressed by this, I would like to encourage them to reach out to you, learn more about system thinking, talk to you about this. And if they like it as well, I hope to see them in the classroom beside me.
Yeah, no, definitely. And don't, people shouldn't be put off by the sort of rigor of this document. It's this was for a specific, purpose to get it published in a journal. Applying it, that map that you saw is much more where we focus on getting the value for people on a daily basis rather than writing it up as a scientific paper, that's for sure. But yeah, definitely happy to talk to people about how they can leverage the approach.
Michael, thank you very much. I hope that everybody who has watched this video will also go and read the paper. I just want to leave everybody up with one last comment. You said that one of your goals was to energize people to engage in this conversation. And that is also one of my goals. Professionalization might change the structure of the market, like Michael has just shown. And maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. But at the end of the day, people have to read the kind of work that Michael has put forward. They have to understand where the industry is heading. And many people in the industry, I think, have amazing skill sets that if we could create an engagement, they could make a significant contribution like Michael has. We now have very clear design criteria and success metrics, and the floor is open for anybody to come up with solutions and ideas. And I truly hope that Home Affairs is going to be able to use that to create a broader engagement with the community and get solutions now that we understand the problem. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.